Morning. Later today, President Joe Biden is expected to sign an executive order aimed at what the administration is calling a promotion of competition within the American economy. The order is set to cover a number of areas, and joining us now to talk through some of the key initiatives within this plan is Bharat Ramamurti. He's a deputy director for the National Economic Council. Bharat, great to speak with you once again. I want to start with an area that jumped out to me within this and has certainly gotten a lot of play in the business press, which is the executive order around non-compete clauses and around the licensing requirements for some industries. I'm wondering if you could just sketch out how the administration thinks about some of these issues and what exactly is in the order.
Sure. So one out of every three private companies has non-compete agreements for its workers, which means that limits the ability of workers to go switch to a better job for them. It has the effect of reducing wages and reducing competition for workers. And in fact, one out of every five workers without a college degree is subject to a non-compete agreement, right? These are folks working in retail, working construction, and so on. We're not talking about high-level executives. And so what the president is calling on the FTC to do is to examine non-compete agreements and take steps to ban or at least curtail the use of those agreements so that those millions of workers are going to have more ability to go switch to a job that's better for them. Same thing on occupational licensing. Look, some licensing is important for protecting public safety, for making sure that people are qualified to do certain jobs. But a lot of the occupational licensing rules that we have simply restrict mobility. And in fact, they restrict people literal mobility, right? They make it harder for somebody who lives in Florida under one licensing regime to move to Georgia and keep being a beautician or working at a nail salon where there's some licensing requirements. It's particularly burdensome on military spouses, 34% of whom work in an industry where there is a license requirement and they have to move every few years because their spouse is in the military. So what we are asking the FTC to do is to look again at the factual record, determine whether some of these occupational licensing restrictions can be eliminated so that workers have a better chance to move, have a better chance to find the job that's best for them. In the president's view, we are in the middle of a historic economic recovery, one that is seeing higher wages for workers, and these changes to improve worker mobility are intended to complement that.
Hey, Bharat, it's Julie here. I want to go back to non-compete for just a moment. And I know that really affects probably the tech industry more than anything else, although some other professional services industries as well. I believe there is also some legislation out there that addresses this issue. So I wonder how this order is being viewed within the administration as being complementary to that, instead of that, as a tool to maybe help nudge that through. How are you guys looking at it?
Well, just one quick correction. You're right. It's prevalent in the tech industry, but it also affects, like I said, construction, hospitality, retail. 60 million workers are subject to this. For a long time, it was fast food workers. You worked at a sandwich shop. You couldn't go work at the sandwich shop across the street because you were subject to a non-compete agreement. Yoga teachers, summer camp counselors are subject to these agreements. So look, this is not just about high-level executives with deep institutional knowledge that's very valuable. That's point number one. Number two, as you note, there are solid bipartisan efforts in Congress to eliminate or restrict non-compete agreements. We would encourage Congress to move forward with that legislation. Of course, legislation can accomplish this more directly and potentially more quickly than working through the rulemaking process. So we don't view this as instead of legislative effort. We encourage Congress to move forward on that legislative effort. If a bill to ban non-compete agreements comes to the president's desk, he'd be happy to sign it.
Digging deeper into this executive order, Bharat, I'm seeing that it says that hospital mergers can be harmful to patients, and you're encouraging the Justice Department and the FTC to review and revise merger guidelines for hospitals. Now, hospital CEOs will say they have had to merge through the years because margins are slim here and they have to gain economies of scale. And if they can't merge, they might have to close hospitals down. What's your message to them?
Well, look, the data shows that there has been quite a bit of consolidation in the hospital industry. That's been particularly harmful for rural communities because what happens is that hospitals consolidate and they shut down the hospitals that operate in rural communities. What we've seen is that after hospital mergers, prices go up for patients by as much as 20%. And by the way, on the wage side, too, research has shown that after hospital consolidation, wages for nurses and administrative staff, the wage growth declines. And so we think that there are real harms to consolidation in the hospital sector. What we are asking the DOJ and the FTC to do is really scrutinize these mergers and make sure that at the end of the day, what's going to happen is a better outcome for patients, a better outcome for people who work at hospitals. We are not prejudging any particular merger, right? It's going to be up to the DOJ and the FTC and the expertise that they have at those agencies. What we are trying to do is point out that this idea that consolidation leads to more efficiency, it's just not borne out in many cases by the evidence.
And Bharat, we keep alluding to how sort of sweeping this bill is, how many different, this is, how many different industries it affects. From an economic big picture perspective, what is the administration hoping this will achieve?
Sure, I think it's very simple. Lower prices for consumers, higher wages for workers, and I want to make sure we hit this point, a more dynamic and innovative economy. We have seen a host of research come out over the last several years about how when industries are more concentrated, there is less investment. There's less investment in R&D specifically. Fewer patents are generated. In other words, as industries get more concentrated, there's less competitive pressure on them to be innovative, to come up with that next great idea to secure customers because they have a stranglehold on the customers, right? So what we are trying to do is by promoting more competition in these industries, not only reduce prices for consumers, but put pressure again on companies to really invest in innovation, invest in training their workers, all so that they can try and produce better products, better services, and attract customers in a truly competitive environment.
And, Bharat, finally, before we let you go, we are certainly still in the midst of the pandemic, but we see the economy rebounding as we start to exit some of the most acute impacts from it. And as you guys on the Economic Council think about where this order fits into the future of the U.S. economy, how much is in response to maybe what our shortcomings were as this pandemic broke out, compared to other initiatives that yourself or other members of the council have for a long time looked at as things we needed to do in the U.S. economy, regardless of whether we had a recession, pandemic, otherwise?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, I think this is about responding both to a long-term trend towards increasing concentration across a number of industries and short-term issues that arose during the pandemic, right? So, for example, there's been incredible consolidation in the meatpacking industry. And when we saw that one of the major meatpackers was affected by a cyber attack, that led to an enormous increase in prices that folks were being charged. And if we had a more diverse, more competitive industry, some of those effects would have been mitigated, right? And so increasing competition is not just about, in the long term, more growth and lower prices. It's also making sure that we have a diverse set of companies that are available to step in case something happens to one of them, which is critical not only for consumers, but in many cases for national security.
All right, we'll leave it there. Bharat Ramamurti, Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. Bharat, thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning. I hope we'll be in touch.